Way back in 1974, right at the dawn of the computer age, an Italian systems expert made this, well, terrifying prediction. It's been mostly forgotten, but his vision of how our world might end wasn't about bombs or some new plague. Nope, it was about something way, way more familiar to all of us.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. What on earth does a quote about the Sabbath have to do with any of this? Just stick with me for a second. For hundreds of years, a dark age was all about a crisis of belief, right? A time when the old truths, the old ways of doing things, were just thrown out and even called heretical.
But what if the next dark age isn't about losing our faith in gods? What if it's about losing faith in the incredibly complex technological systems that, let's be honest, run our entire world? What if the new heresy is just believing that those systems could actually fail?
And that, right there, brings us to our prophet, a man named Roberto Vaca. In his 1974 book, The Coming Dark Age, he laid out this chillingly logical case for a future where civilization itself could just grind to a halt.
You see, while pretty much everyone else was worried about the Cold War or the so-called population bomb, Vaca saw a completely different threat. He was arguing that our power grids, our transportation networks, our communication systems, they were all becoming so huge and so interconnected that they were heading for a catastrophic, cascading failure.
Okay, so let's really dive into Vaca's big idea. He called it reaching the knee of the curve, and it's all about explaining how systems that look like they're getting stronger are actually secretly becoming more and more fragile.
He used this absolutely brilliant analogy. Picture a giant truck climbing a hill. At first, the slope is pretty gentle, but then the road gets steeper and steeper. That's exponential growth. The engine, which is our technology, has to strain harder and harder. And then the road ahead starts to look almost vertical. The big question isn't whether the engine can handle it. The real question is, will the entire truck just tip over backwards before it ever reaches that flat, stable plateau at the top?
That violent tipping point, that's what systems theorists call overshoot. It's this idea that instead of a system just gently slowing down and leveling off, a system pushed to its absolute limits doesn't break. It crashes. It grows so far beyond any kind of stable equilibrium that it collapses, falling back to a level far, far lower than where it even started.
So you might be asking, why was Vaca so convinced our systems were getting close to this tipping point? Well, it's because he saw the problems of his day in a totally different way than most other people.
And what's really fascinating is this contrast. Back in the 70s, most critics were focused on the side effects of growth, things like pollution or traffic jams. Vaca argued that they were totally missing the point. Those weren't the disease, they were just the symptoms. The real danger, he said, was much deeper. The whole system was becoming fundamentally unstable. And he wasn't just guessing, he had evidence. He pointed to the massive Northeast blackout of '65, the time New York's phone network was completely paralyzed, the breakdown of major railways. To Vaca, these weren't just random accidents or, minor inconveniences. They were tremors. They were warning signs that the entire interconnected structure was getting dangerously close to its breaking point.
And this brings us to the most terrifying part of his entire prediction, the cascade of failure. Vaca argued that just a chance coincidence of crises in different systems, power, transport, communication, could amplify each other, setting off a chain reaction that would bring modern society to its knees.
He painted a pretty grim picture. It all starts with a huge power failure. Within just a few hours, transportation completely seizes up. No traffic lights, no subway trains, no fuel pumps at the gas station. A little while later, the communication networks, their backup power totally drained, just goes silent. And by the end of the very first day, the trucks that deliver our food and the pumps that deliver our water have all stopped. The city is dark, it's silent, and it's completely cut off.
So what's the result of all this? Well, Vaca predicted that in a full-scale systems collapse, the population of the entire developed world, that's North America, Europe, the Soviet Union, and Japan, could be cut in half. That is 450 million deaths. Not from a bomb, but from the quiet, intricate failure of the very systems we depend on to survive.
So what would life even look like after this kind of collapse? Vaca wasn't imagining some post-apocalyptic wasteland full of mutants and scavengers. No, he predicted something much quieter and maybe even more profound. A forced, century-long retreat from technology itself.
After that initial catastrophic population drop, he saw the breakup of large nations. Society, he thought, would have to reorganize into smaller, self-sufficient communities. Things like large-scale industry and scientific research would just stop. He believed this new dark age, this period of technological retreat and slow reconstruction, could easily last for 100 years.
Now, here's the thing. Vaca predicted this collapse would happen sometime between 1985 and 1995, which brings us to the pretty obvious question, doesn't it?
Yeah, why are we still here? Why didn't his prophecy come true? I mean, clearly, our systems proved to be more resilient or maybe just a bit luckier than he gave them credit for. But that is definitely not the end of the story.
So what if Vaca wasn't wrong, but just early? Because our systems today are infinitely more complex, more interconnected, and more congested than anything he could have imagined in 1974. I mean, just think about it. We've added global supply chains, the internet, a financial system that moves at the speed of light.
All those anxieties that Vaca was voicing 50 years ago, well, they're coming back, and with a new kind of urgency. Thinkers today, like James Bridle, are now exploring a new dark age, where our own complex technologies are overwhelming our ability to understand or even control our world. So the question that Vaca left us with, it isn't whether he was right about the past, it's whether his warning is finally coming true for our future.